I still remember the day it all started. It was one of those perfect Saturday mornings in May, you know the kind, where the air feels fresh and everything seems possible. I was out front, coffee in hand, admiring the new wooden mailbox my grandfather had crafted for me. It was beautiful, sturdy oak with hand-carved details along the sides, and my last name, Miller, burned into the wood in an elegant script. It had taken him weeks to make, and I'd finally installed it the previous weekend. That's when I saw her marching up my driveway, clipboard in hand, floral blouse buttoned all the way up despite the warm weather. Deborah Wilkins, though everyone in Oakwood Estates just called her HOA Karen behind her back. Her lips were pressed into a thin line that somehow managed to look simultaneously disapproving and satisfied. "Good morning, Mr. Miller," she said, not bothering to return my smile. "I'm conducting routine compliance inspections today." I nodded politely, already feeling a knot forming in my stomach. Deborah was the president of our homeowners association, and she took her role very, very seriously. She made a show of looking at my mailbox, then down at her clipboard, then back at the mailbox. "I'm afraid this will have to go." "Excuse me?" I nearly choked on my coffee. "Your mailbox." She gestured toward it with her pen. "It's in violation of Section 8.3 of the HOA Covenant. All mailboxes must be uniform black metal with standardized dimensions. This wooden creation is not approved." I set my coffee down on the porch railing. "But it's well made. It's actually nicer than the standard ones." "That's not the point, Mr. Miller. Uniformity maintains property values." She was already writing something on her clipboard. "You have 14 days to replace it with an approved model. The specifications are in your welcome packet." "My grandfather made this mailbox," I said, trying to keep my voice level. "He's 83 years old and spent weeks on it. It has sentimental value." Deborah's expression didn't change. "I'm sorry, but rules are rules. You agreed to them when you purchased your home." She tore off a yellow slip from her clipboard and handed it to me. 14 days, or the HOA will impose daily fines." With that, she turned and marched toward the next house, leaving me standing there, violation notice in hand, feeling like I'd been punched in the gut. I spent the rest of the weekend seething. I'd been in the neighborhood for 6 months without any issues. My lawn was immaculate, my trash cans were never left out, and I'd even helped organize the spring cleanup day. But apparently, my crime of having a handcrafted wooden mailbox was unforgivable. By Monday, anger had given way to determination. I wasn't going to roll over on this one. I started by reading the HOA Covenant, all 78 mind-numbing pages of it. And yes, there it was in black and white. Section 8.3 specified that all mailboxes must be uniform black metal with precise dimensions. But as I kept reading, I discovered something interesting. Section 12.1 noted that structures serving as official postal facilities are exempt from aesthetic regulations in Section 8. It was intended for the cluster mailboxes in the newer part of the development, but the wording was vague enough to give me an idea. What followed was a deep dive into USPS regulations. Did you know that private citizens can operate commercial mail receiving agencies under certain conditions? Neither did I, until I spent 3 nights researching postal codes and regulations. I also learned that while the HOA could regulate mailboxes, they had no jurisdiction over structures that qualified as postal service facilities. The plan that formed in my mind was, admittedly, a bit extreme, but Deborah had pushed me too far. If my custom mailbox wasn't allowed, I'd give her something that was technically beyond her authority to regulate. I contacted a contractor friend, then a retired postal worker who knew the regulations inside and out. I applied for the proper permits from both the city and the Postal Service. I ordered supplies, drew up plans, and calculated costs. The day before my compliance deadline, I removed my grandfather's beautiful wooden mailbox. I called him to explain what was happening, and instead of being disappointed, he laughed harder than I'd heard him laugh in years. "You know what, son?" he said between chuckles. "I think I want to help with this new project of yours." Construction began the next day. Grandpa and I worked from sunrise to sunset, joined by a few neighbors who'd had their own run-ins with Deborah. We built a structure that looked like a miniature post office, about the size of a large garden shed, right at the edge of my property line. It had a tiny covered porch, a service window, and even a small flagpole. We painted it the official USPS blue and white, complete with the eagle logo. Inside was my grandfather's wooden mailbox, now serving as the mail receptacle for my new commercial mail receiving agency. I added slots for outgoing mail, a small counter with free postal forms, and even a vintage postal scale I found at an antique shop. Everything was built to code and properly permitted. The best part? Under postal regulations, my mini post office was now an authorized mail receiving facility, which meant it fell under federal jurisdiction rather than HOA regulations. I'll never forget Deborah's face when she came by for her inspection the next day. She stood at the end of my driveway, clipboard hanging limply at her side, mouth literally hanging open. What is this?" she finally sputtered. "Good morning, Miss Wilkins," I said cheerfully. "As requested, I've removed the non-compliant mailbox. This is now the Miller Station, a registered commercial mail receiving agency. Would you like a tour?" Her face went through an impressive range of colors before settling on a deep crimson. "This is not what I meant. This is fully compliant with federal postal regulations and properly permitted by the city," I finished for her. "And according to Section 12.1 of the HOA covenant, structures serving as official postal facilities are exempt from aesthetic regulations." She stood there sputtering for a moment before storming off, already pulling out her phone. I knew this wasn't over, but I couldn't help smiling as I watched her go. Word spread quickly through the neighborhood. By afternoon, curious neighbors were walking by, slowing down to stare at my mini post office. A few brave souls actually came up to ask questions and take a closer look. To my surprise, people loved it. Mrs. Chen from down the street asked if she could drop off a letter for her son overseas. Mr. Rodriguez wanted to know if I sold stamps. Even the Rodriguez kids thought it was the coolest thing they'd ever seen and asked if they could play post office on the weekend. I hadn't planned on actually operating the place, but seeing the neighborhood's reaction, I thought, why not? I stocked up on stamps, priority mail envelopes, and even ordered a rubber date stamp. I posted business hours, just Saturday mornings when I'd be there to accept outgoing mail and help with forms. The first Saturday, I expected maybe a handful of neighbors to stop by as a joke. Instead, I had a steady stream of visitors for 3 hours straight. People brought coffee and donuts. Kids dropped off handmade cards for their grandparents. Mr. Abernathy, who rarely left his house since his wife passed, came by with a package for his daughter in Colorado. "This is just what the neighborhood needed," he told me, his eyes a little misty. "Reminds me of the old days, when people actually talked to each other." Meanwhile, Deborah was on a mission to shut me down. She called a special HOA board meeting the following Tuesday. I received a formal notice to appear and address concerns regarding unauthorized structures. I spent the next few days preparing my case. I gathered all my permits, printed relevant sections of postal regulations, and even had my retired postal worker friend agree to speak on my behalf. I also reached out to a lawyer friend who specialized in property law, just to make sure I hadn't missed anything. The night of the meeting, the community center was packed. Apparently, news of my little rebellion had spread beyond my immediate neighbors, and people from all parts of the development wanted to see the showdown. Deborah presented her case first, complete with a PowerPoint presentation showing before and after photos of my property. She threw around phrases like property values and community standards and slippery slope. If I was allowed to build a post office, what would stop someone else from building a fire station or a police precinct? When my turn came, I calmly presented my documentation and explained how my structure was completely legal and even beneficial to the community. To my surprise, several neighbors stood up to speak in my favor, describing how Miller Station had become a gathering place and how it added character to our otherwise cookie-cutter neighborhood. The board deliberated for what felt like hours, but was probably only 20 minutes. In the end, they ruled that since I had obtained all the proper permits, and since the structure technically qualified as a postal facility under Section 12.1, they couldn't force me to remove it. Deborah was livid. She gathered her things and stormed out of the meeting without another word. Over the next few weeks, Miller Station became something of a neighborhood institution. I expanded my Saturday hours and added a small bulletin board where neighbors could post notices about garage sales, lost pets, and babysitting services. A retired English teacher offered to help people with letter writing. A college kid set up a small table to help seniors with online postal services. Even our mail carrier, Frank, got in on it. He started making Miller Station his last stop of the day on Saturdays so he could chat with neighbors and answer postal questions. In 30 years with USPS, I've never seen anything like this, he told me, grinning from ear to ear. The real surprise came about a month later when a reporter from the local paper showed up. Someone had tipped her off about our neighborhood post office, and she wanted to do a story. The article ran the following Sunday. Neighborhood creates community around mini post office, complete with photos and interviews with happy neighbors. That's when things really took off. People from other neighborhoods started dropping by. A local elementary school arranged a field trip. A film student from the community college asked if she could document the Miller Station phenomenon for her final project. Through it all, Deborah maintained her distance, occasionally driving by slowly but never stopping. I'd wave cheerfully whenever I saw her, which only seemed to irritate her more. Then one Saturday, about 3 months after Miller Station opened, something unexpected happened. I was helping Mrs. Rodriguez with a customs form when I looked up and saw Deborah standing hesitantly at the edge of my lawn. She wasn't carrying her clipboard, and for once, she didn't look angry. I excused myself and walked over to her, bracing for another confrontation. "Mr. Miller," she said stiffly, I have a package that needs to go out today. I wondered if you could help me." I blinked in surprise, but quickly recovered. "Of course, Ms. Wilkins, that's what we're here for." I helped her with her package, a birthday gift for her grandson in Seattle, and showed her how to save a few dollars by using a flat-rate box instead of paying by weight. As she was leaving, she paused. "I still don't approve of how this all happened," she said, looking at the ground. "But I have to admit, it's been good for the neighborhood." Coming from Deborah, this was the equivalent of a glowing endorsement. Over time, even she became a semi-regular at Miller Station, though she never quite lost her rigid demeanor. She even volunteered to organize the station's forms and supplies, since clearly no one else was doing it properly. What I didn't expect was how Miller Station would evolve. By the 6-month mark, we had regular post office hours 3 days a week. Neighbors took turns volunteering, and we developed a real sense of community. The bulletin board expanded to 2, then 3. We added a small bookshelf for a neighborhood book exchange. The Rodriguez kids, who had originally asked to play post office, actually started a pen pal program for the neighborhood children. Every Saturday, they would help younger kids write letters to each other, which would then be delivered the following weekend. Parents loved it because it improved their children's writing skills, and the kids thought it was magical to receive real letters addressed just to them. Mr. Abernathy, once so reclusive, became one of our most regular volunteers. "Gives me a reason to get up in the morning," he confided. He started teaching kids about stamp collecting and sharing stories from his 40 years as a history teacher. Even Frank, our mail carrier, got official permission from his supervisor to use Miller Station as a designated stop on his route. "It's just good community relations," he explained. "And honestly, it makes my job easier to have somewhere to drop off packages that don't fit in standard mailboxes." By our 1-year anniversary, Miller Station had become so much more than a petty revenge against an HOA violation. We celebrated with a neighborhood potluck, complete with a cake shaped like our little blue and white building. The mayor even showed up, presenting us with a Community Builder Award and having his picture taken for the city newsletter. "You've turned a simple mailbox dispute into something that's bringing people together," he told me, shaking my hand for the cameras. "We need more of this kind of creative problem solving." Deborah was at the celebration too, standing somewhat awkwardly to the side until I invited her to help cut the cake. After all, without her strict enforcement of Section 8.3, none of this would have happened. "I suppose I should thank you," I told her quietly as we posed with the cake knife. She raised an eyebrow. "For what? Giving you a violation notice?" for inadvertently helping create all this. I gestured around at the laughing neighbors, the children playing, the sense of community that had blossomed around us. She almost smiled. Almost. Well, Mr. Miller, I still maintain that rules are important, but perhaps some rules can be improved upon. Coming from Deborah, this was practically a revolutionary statement. The second year brought even more changes. A local tech company offered to install free Wi-Fi in and around Miller Station as part of their community outreach program. A retired carpenter built beautiful wooden benches for the small area we now called Post Office Park. The Rodriguez family planted flowers along the walkway. We expanded our services too. Miller Station became a place where neighbors could get notary services, courtesy of Mrs. Chen, who was a notary public, help with government forms. Mr. Rodriguez worked for the Social Security Administration, and even informal English lessons for the growing number of immigrant families in our community. One particularly memorable day, an elderly woman I'd never seen before came into Miller Station looking confused and a bit frightened. She spoke very little English, but with the help of Mr. Lopez, who was volunteering that day and spoke Spanish, we learned she had recently moved in with her daughter's family and had gotten lost while on a walk. While Mr. Lopez called her worried family, I made her tea, and Mrs. Chen brought over cookies from her house next door. By the time her grandson arrived to pick her up, she was smiling and had made 3 new friends. The next weekend, her entire family came to thank us, bringing homemade tamales that disappeared in minutes. This is why we built this place, I told my grandfather when he visited that summer. Not just to get back at Deborah, but to create something that matters. He nodded, running his hand along the wooden mailbox that still stood inside Miller Station. Sometimes the best revenge is living well and helping others do the same. Even the HOA board came around eventually. At their annual meeting, they presented Miller Station with a Neighborhood Beautification Award, an irony not lost on anyone who remembered how this all started. They even amended the HOA covenant to encourage creative community spaces, as long as they were well-maintained and properly permitted. Deborah, still on the board but no longer its president, abstained from the vote. But I noticed she didn't oppose it either. Almost 2 years to the day after receiving that violation notice, I was closing up Miller Station when Deborah approached me. She was without her clipboard, wearing casual clothes, something I'd rarely seen. "Mr. Miller," she began, then stopped. "Jamie," she corrected herself, using my first name for perhaps the first time ever. "I'm retiring from the HOA board next month, moving to be closer to my grandson." "We'll miss you," I said, surprised to find I actually meant it. Deborah had become, if not exactly a friend, then at least a familiar part of our community. She handed me an envelope. "I wanted you to have this before I go." Inside was a certificate, officially designating Miller Station as an exemplary community institution from the Oakwood Estates HOA. But more surprisingly, there was a check for $500 made out to Miller Station Maintenance Fund from Deborah herself. "I still believe in rules," she said, watching me read the certificate. "But I've learned that sometimes the purpose behind the rules matters more than the rules themselves. What you've created here, it's what we all wanted for this neighborhood, even if we went about it differently." I was speechless for a moment. "Thank you, Deborah. This means a lot." She nodded stiffly, but I could see the emotion in her eyes. "Just promise me one thing. Don't let the next HOA president give you too much trouble. I've trained my replacement to be somewhat less rigid." I laughed. "I'll do my best. And you're welcome back anytime. Your organizational skills are sorely missed in the filing system." 3 years have now passed since that fateful day when Deborah marched up my driveway and cited me for my non-regulation mailbox. Miller Station has become a landmark not just in our neighborhood but in our entire town. We've been featured in magazines about community building, and I've even been asked to speak at conferences about creative approaches to neighborhood development. My grandfather, now 86, still visits regularly and helps maintain the wooden mailbox that started it all. He's become something of a local celebrity, with kids asking him to tell the mailbox story whenever he's around. Deborah sends postcards from her new home in Seattle, where she started a community garden in her apartment complex. Her last note mentioned she was thinking of building a little free library next to it. I sent her plans for a miniature version of Miller Station, just in case. As for me, I never expected a simple violation notice to change my life so completely. I've met countless neighbors I would have never known otherwise. I've seen children grow and seniors find new purpose. I've witnessed a community transform from isolated houses into connected homes, all because of a wooden mailbox and a stubborn HOA Karen who inadvertently pushed me to think outside the box, or in this case, to build a much bigger box entirely. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I had simply complied and installed the regulation black metal mailbox. My life would certainly have been simpler, but it would have been infinitely less rich. So if you ever find yourself facing your own Deborah with her clipboard and rulebook, remember my story. Sometimes the greatest opportunities come disguised as problems. Sometimes the strictest rules lead to the most creative solutions. And sometimes a simple mailbox can become the heart of a community. As for Miller Station, we're just getting started. Next month, we're breaking ground on a small community garden behind the building. Mr. Abernathy is starting a history club for local kids, and the Rodriguez children, now teenagers, are organizing a neighborhood-wide celebration for our 3rd anniversary. The official post office even asked if they could do a feature on us for their employee newsletter. Frank is bringing his regional manager by next week for the grand tour. Not bad for a violation of Section 8.3, wouldn't you say? The wooden mailbox my grandfather made still stands inside Miller Station, holding my personal mail just as he intended. But now, instead of being a violation of community standards, it's a reminder that sometimes the best way to build community is to think outside the mailbox. And that, my friends, is how I turned an HOA violation into the best thing that ever happened to our neighborhood. Sometimes, living well really is the best revenge, especially when you bring everyone else along for the ride.